It was a warm southern night in 1946. Crickets, cicadas, the distant wail of a train. Texarkana sat on the line between two states, a town of returning veterans, railroads, and ordinary lives. Then a man, no, the newspapers called him the Phantom, began walking up to cars on lovers' lanes, and, in one case, shooting through a farmhouse window. For 10 weeks, from February 22nd to May 3rd, 8 people were attacked, 5 of them killed, and a town learned to dread sundown.
Marissa, that opening sentence, a town learned to dread sundown, that's exactly it. The period after World War II left communities like Texarkana vulnerable in a way. Population shifts, returning soldiers, an economy still settling. The town literally straddled 2 legal systems, Texas and Arkansas, and that split created gaps investigators would soon find themselves fighting against. Jurisdictional confusion wasn't just bureaucratic, it shaped the entire manhunt.
Yeah, and you can almost hear the line on the map running down State Line Avenue, can't you? It makes the whole story feel split.
Split, right. The police departments, county sheriffs, even state-level agencies had overlapping authority. By the time state police and the FBI were involved, coordination, well, it was patchwork. It matters because when you have a transient, nighttime predator, seamless communication and quick forensic comparison can be crucial. They didn't have that.
Let's start at the beginning, Lynn. February 22nd, 1946. Hollis and Mary Jean Larry. Tell us what happened that night.
They went to a movie, then to a secluded stretch of Richmond Road, what folks called a lover's lane. Around 11:45 p.m., a man appears at the driver's side with a bright flashlight and a white cloth mask. He ordered them out, demanded Hollis remove his pants. When Hollis hesitated, he was struck twice in the head with a pistol, his skull fractured. Mary Jean was assaulted and ultimately escaped barefoot to a nearby house. Hollis flagged down a passing car. They were both the only survivors who saw the assailant.
Their accounts were similar in many ways. Mask, flashlight, pistol. But they disagreed on one critical detail: the man's race. Hollis believed he was white. Mary Jean thought he was light-skinned black or very tanned. That disagreement would ripple through the investigation and public speculation.
And that disagreement wasn't a small footnote. It changed the starting point for profiling. In 1946, the idea of a serial killer wasn't really formed. People thought in terms of fiends or degenerates. When eyewitnesses differ on race, you lose a key filter for suspects. That ambiguity widened the suspect pool in a way that, frankly, the investigators couldn't afford.
Right. And then over a month later, March 24, Griffin and Polly Moore are found in a parked Oldsmobile on Rich Road, both shot in the head with a .32 caliber pistol. That felt like a step up. Escalation.
Exactly. Richard Griffin, 29, was found on his knees between the seats with pockets turned out. Polly Ann Moore, 17, was in the back seat and may have been killed outside and then placed inside. Ballistics suggested a .32 Colt-type pistol, and that's the thread that eventually ties the March and April killings together. But at that point, law enforcement still hesitated to link everything immediately, partly because the first attack hadn't involved gunfire.
I want to pause on something. This bit about pockets turned out. Sometimes that suggests staged robbery, but valuables weren't consistently missing. So was robbery the motive, or was it a misdirection?
Good question. There were elements that suggested staging, like pockets turned out, which might be a red herring. The killer often left valuables. Across the incidents you see sexualized or controlling behavior, a focus on young couples, and a certain ritual, Flashlight to the eyes, commands, separation of the man and woman. Those factors point to a motive beyond simple theft, power, control, sexual violence, though the evidence is messy.
The third attack deepened the pattern. April 13th to 14th. Paul Martin and Betty Jo Booker.
Betty Jo was 15, a saxophonist in a local band. Paul Martin, 16. He picked her up after a gig at the VFW around 1:30 a.m. Martin was found early Sunday morning on North Park Road, shot 4 times in the head and face. Booker was discovered nearly 6 hours later, 2 miles away, shot twice, including once in the face. Bullets matched the .32 caliber used in the Griffin Moore killings, and suddenly the word pattern became unavoidable.
The newspapers seized on it then. Phantom Killer becomes the label in mid-April. That branding had real consequences, didn't it, Len?
Absolutely. The Texarkana Daily News and other outlets used Phantom in headlines. Labels galvanize fear. The Phantom nickname helped mobilize resources and public vigilance, but it also fed panic, rumor, and false confessions. People began seeing the Phantom in everyone, neighbors, odd-looking men, the wrong car on a back road.
And then the pattern breaks, or maybe it widens, with the Starks farmhouse on May 3rd.
The Starks attack is different and terrifying in a distinct way. Virgil Starks is shot through the front window while sitting in his living room chair. Later, his wife Katie is shot in the face and beaten, but she survives. This time the weapon appears to be a .22 caliber rifle, not the .32 used in the Lover's Lane killings. The killer fired through glass into a house. That made everyone realize there's no safe distance.
Katie's escape, crawling out, running across a field barefoot to a neighbor, became one of the most haunting images. She survived being shot twice in the face. It's hard to imagine.
Her testimony is crucial. She heard the shots, she described the intruder's behavior, how he tried doors, tampered with a window, and she gave authorities the only in-depth account of that farmhouse attack. Her survival complicates things for investigators. Different weapon, different scene, same terror.
So, across 10 weeks, 4 major recognized incidents, 8 people attacked, 5 dead, 3 survivors. That is the frame. But let's dig into how the town reacted. Curfews, porch lights, people nailing windows. What else do we know about that social panic?
People panicked in very practical ways. Theaters and dance halls emptied earlier. Parents forbade teens from driving out. Gun and ammo sales spiked. Folks bought dogs or nailed windows shut. Some built crude alarm systems with string and cans. There were also vigilante stakeouts and, worryingly, near shootings when someone mistook an officer for the Phantom. Rumors and accusations multiplied. False confessions piled up, at least 9 by some counts.
That public hysteria must have made policing harder.
It did. The investigation had perhaps 200 to 400 officers, including Texas Rangers and some FBI advisors. Manuel Gonzalez, the ranger, became a media figure, warning young amateur sleuths not to put themselves in danger. But coordination challenges, primitive forensics, and rumor-driven suspects made it a chaotic manhunt. They set roadblocks, surveilled lovers' lanes, did house-to-house canvasses, but they were fighting a social panic as much as a killer.
Let's talk about evidence, Lynn. Ballistics tied some of the shootings to a .32, but the Starks had a .22. Fingerprints were scant. No DNA. Tire tracks? Polygraphs? What were their best tools?
Ballistics was the strongest physical lead. .32 bullets linked Griffin Moore and Martin Booker. Tire tracks produced leads that sometimes pointed to local men, but those leads fizzled. No usable fingerprints for a decisive match.
Investigators relied heavily on witness statements and what we now call behavioral inference, but the tools were limited. They had roadblocks, checkpoints, and lots of manpower, but forensic science as we know it simply wasn't available.
Which is where suspects like Youell Swinney come in. Walk us through how he became the central figure in later accounts.
In July 1946, police following stolen car leads traced a vehicle to Peggy Swinney. When she was arrested, she implicated her husband, Youell Swinney, in car thefts, and then gave detailed statements that seemed to tie Youell to at least the Booker Martin murders. Officers like Deputy Max Tackett and others believed the Swinney stories had kernels of truth. Peggy described places where stolen items were disposed of, and police found items where she said. That made Youell a serious suspect.
But there were major legal hurdles. Peggy recanted and refused to testify, right?
Right. Under Texas law at that time, a spouse couldn't be compelled to testify against the other. Peggy recanted or refused to cooperate, leaving investigators without an admissible confession. There was also no ballistic tie between Youell's known weapons and the murders. He was ultimately convicted of habitual car theft and sent to prison in 1947, not murder. He was released in 1973 and died in 1994, never legally labeled the Phantom.
So circumstantial, but unresolved.
Exactly. Some investigators stayed convinced, Max Tackett among them, and later writers like James Presley have argued strongly for Swinney's responsibility. But the gaps are significant. No court conviction for murder, shifting statements from Peggy, and missing forensic anchors. The case against him is persuasive to some, inconclusive to others.
Let me interrupt. Lynn, did the timeline and geography always fit Swinney? Were there places where he couldn't have been?
Scholars and independent researchers have raised questions about whether Swinney's verifiable whereabouts line up with every attack. Records are incomplete. The possibility exists that not all incidents were by the same person. The Hollis Larry assault might differ from the Lover's Lane shootings, and the Starks farmhouse attack differs in weapon and method. That opens the door to a multi-offender theory, or to a single offender who changed tactics.
And then there were odd cases like Earl Cliff McSpadden, found dismembered by train, or
McSpadden's death is one of those unresolved nodes. He was found with limbs severed by a train 16 miles north of Texarkana. The jury suggested he was dead before being placed on the tracks. Some speculated he was another victim, or even the Phantom committing suicide. There's no proof. It's the kind of detail that fuels local myth-making, an eerie coincidence, but not evidence.
So we have multiple threads, some strong, some fragile. That's why the Phantom haunts us. Absence of a name. No letters, no calls, no manifesto. He never sought the spotlight the way other later killers did.
Yes, in that sense, he's defined by silence. Many modern serial offenders crave attention. They taunt police, send letters, or get theatrical. The Phantom didn't, or at least not in ways we can document. That silence makes him more frightening, more of a legend. The abrupt end of attacks after May 3 only deepened the mystery. Did he die, leave, get imprisoned for something else, or stop for unknown reasons? No answer.
I want to bring the survivors back into the center here. Mary Jean Larey and Katie Starks both carried lifelong trauma. We have to remember the human cost, not just the myth.
Absolutely. Mary Jean later said she would know his voice anywhere. The memory never left her. Katie survived 2 shots to the face and a brutal beating. She became a symbol of resilience, but carried the scars. The film and touristic attention sometimes sidelines their experiences, which is ethically fraught. Every retelling risks re-traumatizing survivors or families, so we have to be careful and respectful when recounting their stories.
That ethical tension extends to pop culture. the films based on the case.
Yes. Charles Pierce's 1976 film, The Town That Dreaded Sundown, popularized a certain visual, a killer with a sack mask attacking couples. The film took liberties, dates, names, even invented sequences like the trombone knife scene. It embedded a cinematic version of the Phantom into cultural memory, making it harder to separate fact from dramatization. The town later held screenings, which turned trauma into ritualized spectacle.
Ritualized spectacle, yeah. And then the 2014 meta-sequel layers the paranoia further, showing how a town reenacts its nightmare. But Len, does that film tradition help or harm public understanding?
It does both. It keeps the case in public conversation, which can lead to fresh research and attention to victims, but it also flattens complexity into a neat horror template: masked man, lovers in cars, a single monstrous figure. That template is easy to market, but hard for actual historical truth. It reshapes collective memory, sometimes at the expense of nuance.
Let's return to the investigative mistakes. What do you think were the most consequential missteps?
Several stand out. The jurisdictional fragmentation we discussed, over-reliance on rumor and public accusations that wasted resources, limited forensic capability, and the handling of witness statements like Peggy Swinney's. False confessions and suspect hype diverted attention. Also, investigators didn't have a modern behavioral science toolkit. Profiling was rudimentary. Those factors made it far easier for a suspect to slip through, or for multiple suspects to be conflated into one legend.
There's also the question of motive: robbery, sexual violence, power. Which seems central?
The evidence points toward sexualized violence and control, especially the assault on Mary Jean and the pattern of separating the man and woman, using a flashlight to blind and issuing authoritative commands. Robbery elements appear sporadically but inconsistently, which suggests they were a misdirection or opportunistic rather than primary. The killer seemed more interested in domination and terror.
Disturbing.
Disturbing, yes, and calculated. The use of a white cloth mask or pillowcase turned an ordinary local into a faceless archetype. The mask amplified fear. It also made eyewitness ID more difficult and gave the public a simple symbol to fear.
We should talk about Youell Swinney in more detail. His background, the pro and con of the case against him.
Swinney was born in February 1917, son of a Baptist minister with a long criminal record for car theft and counterfeiting. The pro side, Peggy's statements placed him. She led police to discarded items, and investigators found corroboration in places. He was a local man with opportunity and the sort of criminal history that made investigators suspicious. The con side, Peggy recanted, couldn't be compelled to testify due to spousate privilege. There was no ballistics or physical evidence linking him. Some researchers question whether his whereabouts match every attack. He was convicted for car theft, not murder, and died in 1994, having never been tried for the Phantom killings.
Len, do you think it's possible all the attacks were not by the same person?
It's possible and even plausible. The first attack involved a pistol whipping and sexual assault, but no shooting, and the Starks farmhouse involved a .22 rifle fired into a house. Differences in weapon and scene could indicate different offenders, or one offender escalating or changing methods. The public narrative simplifies into a single phantom because that's how media and memory prefer to package terror. Reality is messier.
So then, why does the Phantom persist in our imagination more than other unsolved cases?
Because of silence and the archetype. No letters, no manifesto, no capture. Just sudden, violent acts that stop as abruptly as they started. Add the mask image, the Lover's Lane horror, and the films that dramatize it. It's an early prototype of the masked slasher figure. That combination, visual potency
plus lack of closure, creates a cultural nightmare that's easy to reawaken.
There's also a human urge to name the monster. People wanted a single villain they could point to. Youell Swinney filled that role for many, even without a conviction.
That's right. Naming a suspect gives psychological closure. For law enforcement, it can concentrate reinvestigation efforts. For the public, it eases fear a little. But when legal proof is lacking, naming a person can be unjust and distort history. It's a heavy responsibility.
Speaking of responsibility, what lessons did Texarkana offer to modern policing?
Several. Centralized coordination in cross-jurisdictional crimes is essential. Rapid and careful preservation of evidence matters. Avoid public theatrics that inflate rumor, and treat witness testimony with rigorous corroboration. Modern forensics, DNA, ballistics databases, unified communications could have changed the outcome, but hindsight is always easier.
And the victims, how should we frame them when retelling?
Always at the center. Mary Jean, Katie, Hollis, Virgil, Polly, Betty Jo, Paul. These were people with names, families, futures, stolen or scarred. Our storytelling should honor that by resisting sensational simplification and by acknowledging trauma. Films and pop culture can be used responsibly only if they don't eclipse survivor voices.
Amen to that.
By the way, Marissa, do you think the annual screenings at Spring Lake Park helped healing, or did they commercialize tragedy?
I think it's both. They kept memory alive, which can be important, but transforming trauma into an event can also feel exploitative. Some families resented it. The town performing its nightmare every year, there's a strange psychological economy there.
It becomes a ritual that both remembers and reheats.
Let's end with the central unanswered questions, 3 of them, that keep historians and armchair detectives awake.
Go ahead, Marissa. What are your top 3?
1. Did Youell Swinney commit one, some, or all of the phantom attacks? 2. Did jurisdictional fracture materially prevent a conviction? 3. Why did the attacks stop? Death, incarceration, or abdication of the compulsion? Those 3 shape everything we might still want to know.
Concise and sharp. For my part, I'd add, can modern forensic re-examination of preserved evidence, if any exists, resolve any of this? Some cases have been solved decades later with DNA. We don't know if useful material survived, but the legal and ethical hurdles to reopening and publicizing an investigation still remain.
And we should close by acknowledging the town's, Texarkana's, identity has been changed by this case.
Yes, the case is woven into local lore, ghost tours, true crime tourism, and a cultural shorthand that follows the town's name. Some residents resent it, others see it as inescapable history. Either way, it shows how a crime can eclipse a community's broader story.
So we return to the image that began this episode. A beam of light in a dark car, a white cloth mask, a command, do what I say. No name, no manifesto, just the echo of shots, and people who never stopped listening for footsteps.
That image sticks because the phantom never gave them what they wanted most. A name, a face, a reason. The silence is worse than any confession would have been. It leaves a town and us wondering.
Thank you, Lynn. Any final thought for listeners?
Remember the victims. If you're fascinated by true crime, check sources carefully. Separate film from fact, myth from archive, and recognize how community trauma gets packaged into lore. That's where the responsibility of retelling lives.
If you want to dig further, the episode notes include primary sources and local histories. We'll link those. We don't want to send everyone to the cemetery for clues.
No, but study the newspapers from April 1946. Watch how language shapes fear. It's instructive.
One last image as we sign off. A town that for 10 weeks couldn't trust the dark. Not just because of one killer, but because the system that was supposed to protect them was, well, split down the middle. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Marissa. And to everyone listening, stay careful out there and keep asking questions.
Good night.
Good night.